Canny, good morning.
Good morning to you and the viewers at home. Well, today marks day 4 of the October leg of the JSC interviews. As you've correctly stated, some of the prominent themes that have come out is transformation, gender representation in the judiciary, and then of course the Electoral Court interviews yesterday. Some of those tough questions brought about the questioning of whether we need a specialist court to deal with gender-based violence and femicide, as well as what will happen with independence in 2024. As of now, the legislation that is required for that to take place does not exist. And then of course today we can expect a very big Gauteng division. There's quite a number of interviews lined up today, but for the purposes of time, I'm joined by Judges Matters researcher Begazeli Benjamin, who's going to unpack some of these prominent themes that came out during the 4 days that we have seen so far at the JSC interviews. Mr. Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us. I think let's quickly first start at transformation and gender representation. These are prominent themes that have showed up during these interviews, but as we've seen, the Supreme Court of Appeal division that had 11 candidates, only 2 women made it, and then it was 3 males that were recommended to that particular court. Of course, the next day we saw the Competition Appeal Court, that was a male judge that was recommended for that. The Electoral Court saw a woman judge, Judge Mokumi, that showed up for the interviews. However, Judge Zondi, a male judge, was recommended for that post as well. And then surprisingly, the Limpopo division, for the judge president there were 3 male candidates that came to interview for that. Not one woman judge was there. So now this prominent theme keeps coming up. However, we can see that it's not exactly translating throughout these JSC interviews. Is that your analysis as well?
Yes, so the theme of gender representation, especially at the leadership level, is something that we as Judges Matter raised as a concern coming into these interviews. And even when the announcement for the vacancies came out, we did try to encourage women judges, women lawyers to put themselves forward, and we did put it to the JSC that gender and at the leadership level is an issue. Our judiciary is 40% women, but if you don't have them at the leadership rung, it is a problem. And in these interviews, I'm afraid they showed that kind of problem. But of course, the Constitution, when you read it at Section 174, it does speak of, firstly, you have to look at the qualities of the candidate, which is where you start, and then later you look at gender. We say that yes, the JSC should look at the excellence and the qualities that the candidates have, but of course they must do much more than they have done in encouraging more women to put themselves forward.
And what we've seen so far is the JSC meeting the constitutional requirement of transformation.
Well, so far, the JSC, look, we have to look at it in context. In the past couple of years, the JSC has made great strides to put more women in. Just looking at the statistics alone, in 2016, there were 31% women in the judiciary. Right now, we're sitting closer to 40-something% in the last 5 years. And so that is progress. But of course, right now, we're reaching a point where we're starting to question the positions of power. Why are there no women in the positions of power in the judiciary? And that's where the JSC is not meeting the standard, and that's where we are concerned.
Now today we'll be looking at, most importantly, the Gauteng division. Could you explain to us the significance of that division, as well as the important candidates that we will see coming through for that, as well as the gender representation in that division?
So the Gauteng division is the busiest court in the country. It hears about 52% of all civil cases in the whole entire country. Between Pretoria and Johannesburg, judges there deal with upwards of 100 matters a day. And so it needs someone who is a strong lawyer, who knows the law, who works hard, who's able to deal with the pressures that come with having to deal with such an enormous workload. A big problem in Gauteng is that there are just not enough judges. This is a concern that we've raised. The Minister of Justice, we've put it to him that he needs to get more judges in that court because the workload is just unbearable. So right now, these candidates will be asked about some of those issues, how they have been able to deal with the work in Gauteng. Most of them have acted in the Gauteng division, so they have that experience, they have that knowledge of the court. But of course, the big test is on whether they'll be able to step up to the mark. Gender is not such a big problem in Gauteng. If you look at the number of women judges that are there, I think we're closer to 50-50 than in most other courts. courts, and they have a really good, even in as much as it's a big court, they have really strong collegiality, and there's been a really good leadership in that court. So it is one of our better performing courts, and so these judges, the candidates that will be interviewed today will be joining a strong court. It's just the workload that will be a challenge for them.
And lastly, very quickly, are there any candidates that we can look out for in the Gauteng division today that will be interviewed?
Well, for the land claims court, we have Ms. Luleka Flatela, who's done a lot of land issues, so she's one to look out for. Later, we have a human rights lawyer, which is uncommon for the JSC, Advocate Wilson, who dealt with the Tegofatso Pule case. So, yeah, so those are some of the candidates.
All right, perfect. That was Mr. Benjamin just giving us a bit of an update on the key themes that have been discussed, that is transformation, gender representation, as well as the role of specialist courts in gender-based violence and femicide.